To truly understand the seismic shift that occurred at Wimbledon in the early 1980s, one must first look at the tools of the trade. We were witnessing the swan song of the wooden racket era, a time when the equipment was as temperamental and unforgiving as the players who wielded it. Björn Borg, for instance, stepped onto the grass with a custom-made Donné Pro. But the sheer madness of Borg's setup lay not in the wood itself, but in the strings. He demanded them pulled to a staggering 80 pounds of tension, an astronomical pressure designed to generate his signature punishing topspin. This tension was so immense, so volatile, that his wooden frames would frequently snap and splinter in the dead of night, echoing through his hotel room like pistol shots. This was the final romantic struggle of organic materials, a fleeting moment before graphite and composite frames arrived to ruthlessly revolutionize the speed, power, and trajectory of the sport forever. Yet the revolution brewing on the centre court was not merely technological, it was profoundly cultural. Wimbledon, at its very core, was and remains an institution steeped in Edwardian tradition. The All-England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club represented the absolute zenith of the British establishment. It was a world defined by hushed, polite applause, meticulously manicured lawns, the formidable presence of the royal box, and, above all, the uncompromising all-white dress code. It was an environment that did not just ask for deference, it demanded it. But outside those ivy-clad walls, Britain was shifting. The pristine aristocratic lawns of SW19 were on a collision course with the vibrant, gritty reality of 1980s youth culture. The attire of these sporting gladiators began to spill out of the country clubs and directly on to the British high streets. The elegant pinstriped Fila polos worn so effortlessly by Borg and the bold Sergio Tacchini track tops favoured by his fiercest rivals were rapidly co-opted by the working-class youth. This was the dawn of the casuals subculture.
Almost overnight, elite tennis apparel became the ultimate symbol of street credibility on the football terraces up and down the country. The sport of kings, queens, and the polite upper crust was now unwittingly outfitting the rebellious youth of a nation. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The stage was perfectly set, not just for a championship tennis match, but for a spectacular clash of classes, attitudes, and generations. Into this delicate cultural ecosystem stepped two men who could not have been more fundamentally opposed if they had been scripted by a dramatist. They were the perfect avatars for a shifting era. On one side of the net stood Björn Borg, with his flowing blonde hair, his signature pinstriped headband, and an aura of almost unsettling tranquility. He was less a traditional athlete and more a Scandinavian deity. The British press, mesmerised by his icy demeanour, dubbed him the IceBorg. He was a baseline specialist, operating with a relentless metronomic precision that slowly suffocated his opponents. He showed no emotion, no frustration, no fraying at the edges. Yet beneath that stoic rock star facade lay an excruciating self-imposed psychological pressure to maintain a veneer of absolute perfection. Directly across from him stood his fiery antithesis, John McEnroe. A mercurial, wild-haired New Yorker, McEnroe played a breathtaking, aggressive serve and volley game. Where Borg was absolute silence, McEnroe was a cacophony. He didn't merely play against the man across the net, he waged a very public, very vocal war against the umpires, the line judges, and seemingly the very institution of Wimbledon itself. The voracious British tabloid press, always hungry for a pantomime villain, gleefully christened him Superbrat. The friction between McEnroe's raw, unfiltered emotion and the hushed, polite sanctum of centre court was electrifying. It was a visceral culture clash playing out on live television. It was within this cauldron that he delivered the immortal, furious words that remains permanently etched into the global cultural lexicon. "You cannot be serious." This outburst, and the many that followed, was never merely a dispute over chalk dust. It was perceived as a brazen, loud assault on the British establishment. And the establishment, deeply unamused by this rebellion, struck back in the only way it knew how. Following a later triumph, the All England Club took the unprecedented and frankly astonishing step of denying McEnroe the customary honorary membership, an aristocratic snub that perfectly encapsulated the chasm between the old guard's demand for decorum and the new world's demand for raw, unbridled passion. This simmering tension finally boiled over on the 4th of July, 1980, creating what is still widely regarded as the greatest tennis match ever played. But to truly grasp the magnitude of this final, you have to understand the sheer unifying power of the analog television era. This wasn't an event you could stream later on a commute or catch up on via a fleeting highlight reel on a smartphone. This was a collective, national standstill. As the match progressed into the late afternoon, nearly 17 million Britons were utterly transfixed by BBC One. The streets outside fell entirely, eerily silent. Entire neighborhoods held their breath in unison, united by the glowing curved screens in the corners of their living rooms. The crescendo of this shared national anxiety arrived in the fourth set tiebreak. It was 20 minutes of pure, unadulterated sporting theatre. McEnroe, staring down the barrel of defeat, fought with a feral, desperate brilliance. He famously saved 5 championship points. The rhythm of the ball, the heavy, resonant thud of its striking those tightly strung wooden frames, became the heartbeat of a captivated nation. Every rally was a nerve-shredding exchange of blistering power and impossible angles. When McEnroe finally clinched that superhuman tiebreak 18-16, forcing a fifth and final set, the roar from the centre court crowd was so deafening it seemed to shake the very foundations of the All England Club.
Yet it was in the crucible of that deciding fifth set that the IceBorg truly cemented his mythology. A lesser man would have crumbled, his spirit shattered by the monumental physical and mental exertion of that lost tiebreak. But Borg simply reset. His face remained a mask of impenetrable calm, betraying absolutely no lingering disappointment. He stepped back onto the baseline, methodically adjusted his strings, and proceeded to serve with a chilling, ruthless efficiency. When Borg finally dropped to his knees, throwing his arms skyward in victory after claiming the fifth set 8-6, it was an image of pure, exhausted catharsis. The fire had raged brilliantly, but the ice, miraculously, had refused to melt. Yet the defining tragedy of this rivalry, if one can call it a tragedy, is how violently and abruptly it came to an end. We celebrate the gladiatorial triumph of 1980, but it is the psychological fallout of 1981 that truly lingers in the collective memory of the sport. The following summer, McEnroe returned to the lawns of SW19 and finally exacted his revenge, dismantling his great rival and snapping Borg's unprecedented, seemingly invincible streak of 41 consecutive Wimbledon victories.
But it was the aftermath, culminating a few months later at the US Open, that profoundly shocked the world. Borg, having lost to McEnroe once more in the final, walked straight off the court, bypassed the trophy ceremony entirely, and simply drove away from the stadium. The ice hadn't merely melted, it had shattered. The immense, crushing weight of maintaining that flawless, stoic facade, of being the undisputed king of the baseline, had finally taken its toll. At the age of just 26, an age where most athletes are only just entering their absolute physical prime, Björn Borg walked away from professional tennis completely. He had succumbed to a profound, inescapable psychological burnout. And in a deeply poignant twist of fate, the fire could find it could not burn quite as brightly without the ice. McEnroe would later confess that when Borg abruptly retired, a vital, irreplaceable part of his own competitive drive died alongside his rival's career. The sport had lost its most compelling, dramatic narrative. Today, modern tennis is an absolute marvel of biomechanics, sports science, and aerospace engineering. The athletes are undoubtedly faster and stronger, their diets are mathematically calculated, and their modern carbon fiber rackets strike the ball with a terrifying clinical velocity. It is, objectively, a superior athletic spectacle. But as we look back from the vantage point of the present, one cannot help but feel that something fragile, romantic, and beautifully human has been lost. The modern game, for all its glossy perfection, often lacks the wild, unfiltered chaos of those wooden racket days. It misses the stark, theatrical contrast of the silent deity and the roaring rebel. Those analog summers of the 1980s, where an entire nation sat hushed and breathless in front of a flickering cathode ray tube, united by a shared cultural ritual, are gone forever, swept away by the relentless tide of the digital age. But for a certain generation, the memory of that immaculate green grass, the smell of summer rain, and the sheer, blistering drama of Borg and McEnroe will remain forever untouched by time.